Hello, everyone. I'm Vance Ballard with the National Sports Media Association. Joining me today is John Clay, a 40-year veteran of the Lexington Herald Leader in Kentucky and now seven-time Kentucky Sports Writer, winner of the Kentucky Sports Writer of the Year award. John, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. The pleasure is all mine. Like I said, thank you for joining us. Congratulations again on the well-deserved, much earned award.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we'll get started today. First of all, how long or when did you know what was it that clicked kind of in your life, in your brain, influence growing up that made you decide or become interested in being a sports journalist where you said, hey, this is the path I want to take?
Well, I mean, growing up, I was, like many sports writers, big fan of sports, really all sports. Growing up here, I grew up here in Central Kentucky. Obviously, a fan of Kentucky sports, Kentucky basketball, and so forth. I had a relative who was the coach of he was Kentucky football coach, and then he was coach of the Cleveland Browns. So, in Blanton Collier, so we kind of grew up as Cleveland Browns fans, following the NFL and so forth. And then as I got, I'm not the tallest or most athletic person in the world, so I don't think actual playing sports was anything that was I could bank on in my future. And as I got older, got into writing and doing that sort of thing, and kind of combined the two together to be a sports writer. I mean, I feel like I was very lucky in that I've been very lucky all along, but I was lucky early on that I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to do. And so I was not one of these people who was searching around wondering, what do I want to do as far as my profession goes. I knew pretty early on that I wanted to be a sports writer, and I've been lucky enough to be able to do that, as you mentioned, over the past 40 years.
Well, that is very interesting there, very intriguing. So, I know we've hit on it a few times. You've been at the Lexington Herald now for 40 plus years. Tell me more about the journey get there, to get to the role and the current position that you're in today, the path you took.
Well, like I said, I knew pretty early on that that's what I wanted to do. And even when I was in high school, I worked for the local paper in the town where I went to school in Winchester, Kentucky. I also worked nearby in Paris, Kentucky, where I was actually born and my parents were from. I worked for their newspaper as well, stringing games, covering games, that sort of thing. When I got to college at the University of Kentucky, I worked for the student newspaper, the Kentucky Colonel there, while also doing some continuing to do some writing for the local papers there in Central Kentucky. Then in 1980, a friend of mine who was also a journalism student at UK, he had been working as an agate clerk, as used to be in those days, at the Lexington Leader, which at that time was the afternoon paper. And he was from Alabama, and he was going back to Alabama to be a for the summer, and he asked me if it would be okay if he recommended me to take his place for the summer as a summer job. I said sure. So I got hired at the Lexington Leaders in that summer, and then the next summer, the Lexington Herald, which was the morning paper, hired me as a for a summer, kind of a summer internship sort of thing there that summer. I had been lucky enough to finish second place in a college sports writing contest at Sports Illustrated, which I think sort of kind of got at the attention of the sports editor there at the Lexington Herald. And then, so I spent the summer in 1981 working for the Herald. And then at the end of that summer, they told me they would like to hire me full time, but they were having a hiring freeze at that time, and so I ended up getting hired right after Thanksgiving, December 1st, full time in 1981. So that's how I kind of got my foot in the door. Really, I got my foot in the door by being able to work for those smaller papers there in Central Kentucky. I covered everything from junior high football games right up to high school games. Even did a little, was fortunate enough to do some games covering UK, doing sidebars and so forth for those papers. And that allowed me to have clips that I were able to, show people and be able to, and I think that helped me get my foot in the door. So I'm very grateful for those people, for both those smaller papers, for helping me, giving me that opportunity.
Awesome, I like to hear that. And the Kentucky Colonel, that's a great name for a newspaper, by the way. I was unaware that was the name of the
Yes.
school paper, but that is an incredible name. Well done there. So we touched on the your intro and getting into it with your peers in this industry. So this, like we said, this is your seventh um, time winning this award. Congratulations! That speaks volumes to your career and the respect your peers have for you and what you do. Try to put into words kind of what that means to have been nominated or not been awarded this now the seventh time by your peers.
Well, it means a lot. And it means a lot also because I'm not sure, but I think it was in the early 90s when I won my first Kentucky Sports Writer, was named my first Kentucky Sports Writer of the Year award. So to be able to continue and then get it here again for 2024, that means a lot to me, not only from the longevity standpoint, but to have the respect of my peers, which obviously means a lot to me. We are competitors. We compete against each other. We want to get that scoop or we want to write that really great story and so forth. But I've always found that over the years, sports writers, and I think the same thing with the media people, whether it's in TV or radio, we're kind of a brethren. We're a lot, we're together a lot, whether it's at home doing press conferences, covering games, or being on the road. And you get to know the other people who cover the same sports that you cover. You have some of the same experiences, the same challenges. So to be able to have the respect of my peers, I mean, that means a lot to me. And like I said, to have that for so long, that means a lot to me as well.
Exactly. And like you say, is with the longevity you've built up, the amount of times now, it's proven now that that respect is there. There are people in the industry who appreciate your craft and the work you put into it. Speaking of that craft and the work you put in, I'm not sure if people realize watching this or listening to this, but you have covered as many Kentucky Derbies as just about has been on television. I believe the number is 42 straight now.
Right.
Kentucky Derbies. So talk a little bit about that. I know as someone from the East Coast who is just kind of aware of the Kentucky Derby, obviously everyone is. Talk about what the environment is being at that sporting event and what it's like getting to be around and cover such an illustrious event.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously the Kentucky Derby is very special to the state of Kentucky. For what I do, obviously we concentrate a lot on University of Kentucky football and obviously University of Kentucky basketball during football and basketball season. And then when that is over, then I turn my attention to covering the Kentucky Derby and the races leading up to the Kentucky Derby, whether it's the Bluegrass Stakes here at Keeneland and Lexington or other prep races. So that it's a great contrast for me when you go from football to basketball and then to horse racing, which is completely different from football and basketball. Obviously, the characters involved, whether they're owners or trainers, are completely different, but just the whole landscape of covering the races, covering the barns, the barns on the backside the week leading up to the race at Churchill Downs, the crowds, kind of the pomp and circumstance and the history and tradition that goes with the Derby. It's a great event. People ask me, I've been in it for so long. People ask me, what do you have a favorite moment? Do you have a favorite, game that you covered? And there's so many of them. Been fortunate enough to cover a bunch of Final Fours, especially with Kentucky basketball and national championship games. But one that sticks out to me actually involves horse racing. When American Pharoah in 2015 won the Triple Crown at Belmont Park in New York. I was lucky enough to be there to cover that. And being down on the racetrack when American Pharoah crossed the finish line in that race and to finally do it after 37 years, to finally have a Triple Crown winner, just the anticipation leading up to that race and just to hear the crowd when he crossed the finish line, that ranks way up there. And yeah, like you said, I've been fortunate. I've covered every Kentucky Derby since 1982. I think I was on TV a little before that. I don't think I'm quite all of the ones that are on TV, but it's a great event and it's unlike anything else that I cover. So it's a great event and it's a great change of pace and something different for me to cover after going through the football and basketball seasons.
Right, and you touched on that there, and I'll be honest, I can only just assure me how good you are at your everyday day job there. I've got goosebumps just listening to you describe the Kentucky Derby. So that it feels like something I'm ready to go. And I know you touched on, excuse me, I know you touched on the mindsets there, the difference between going from a sport like Kentucky basketball, or Kentucky football, but specifically basketball with such I don't want to say rabid, but for lack of a better term, rabid fan base or raucous, passionate fan base. What is it like going from a sport like that who has a strong fan base with the school into horse racing, where I'm not really certain if do horses have fans? I know that we know who trainers are and we know the names of horses and things, but are there really fans? And how do you navigate writing about horses versus writing about basketball and who you're writing for?
Well, one of the things that, and I say this all the time to people here, one of the great things about my job here is that people are very passionate about Kentucky sports, University of Kentucky sports. I mean, there's a very passionate core following of Kentucky football. Obviously, Kentucky football doesn't have the history and tradition, and it's not experienced success over the years like Kentucky basketball. But obviously, Kentucky basketball, the Big Blue Nation, as it's called, they're very passionate about Kentucky basketball. And that's been great from my standpoint because people have opinions about Kentucky basketball. I write opinions. They don't always agree with me, but that's fine. They're interested in opinions. They have their own opinions and they're very passionate about it. And it's the same thing in horse racing. People who love horse racing, especially in this area in Kentucky and especially in central Kentucky, they absolutely love horse racing. And yes, there are many fans of many horses. As people get attached to horses. Obviously, Secretariat, probably the most famous 3-year-old thoroughbred, certainly since Man of War, but certainly of modern times. In 1973, who won the Triple Crown, was just a spectacular horse who was just down the road at Claiborne Farm after his retirement during his years as a stallion. I mean, there's a park, and there are at least 3 statues in Kentucky of Secretariat. There's a park in Paris, Kentucky, that is devoted to Secretariat. People come from all over the country to come to see, to be in Central Kentucky, to see Keeneland, to see where Secretariat, the park, and so forth. So yes, there are a lot of horse racing fans, and they do get attached to the horses. They love horses. So many people come here, and they say, "Well, I just love horses, and I love, I want to be where there are horses and where horses are important." So yeah, that's been a fun thing as well because people are passionate about it in this area.
Right. And with you, as you mentioned, you're a Kentucky native, lifelong there. Do you think that has being a Kentucky native, does that have any sort of impact on your career, on your writings, the passion and the care that you bring to your job? And following up on that, had you, let's say, gone to Kansas or Missouri, Oklahoma, Nebraska, somewhere like that to cover sports, had your career path or profession taken you there, do you think that would have impacted your passion, desire, love for sports?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I think obviously I have an advantage in the fact that I grew up here. I know the history of Kentucky sports. I was a passionate sports fan growing up before I got into journalism. So I think, I know the history. I've experienced the history of both football and basketball here and other Kentucky sports as well as horse racing. So that helps. I mean, I think there's something to be said for an outside perspective as well. Somebody who comes in from the outside and who sees it from a different set of eyes who may not know quite the history but can see it in a different light. I think that's definitely there is a place for that as well. But as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I think I've been fortunate that I can write about Kentucky sports, and I know so many people who are passionate about it, and I know the history of it. So I think that's been an advantage, especially in what I do about as a columnist and having opinions and writing, whether it's features or opinions or some sort of news item or whatever. I think it helps me that I do have that experience. So yeah, I think there's definitely a place for somebody from outside. If I had gone someplace else in my career and as a sports writer, maybe I would have brought a different perspective to it. But I like I feel fortunate that I've been able to stay here my whole career and write about things that people are passionate about and that I was passionate about growing up.
Right, gotcha. So yeah, as you mentioned that you were a sports fan growing up, so it wasn't always you thought it's got to be Kentucky sports I write about. It was more of I'm fortunate enough to write about Kentucky sports at this point.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, and obviously when you get, I mean, I think it's true of so many of when you get closer to it, whether it's covering University of Kentucky football and basketball, you see it maybe in a different perspective. But you have that overall feel and that overall, the history, the background, what it means to the people of Kentucky, especially when we're talking about basketball and the success that the program has had over the years. So I kind of bring that perspective to it as well.
Yeah. And now, so we mentioned those things. You talked about American Pharaoh, obviously, so we'll put that one aside. More in terms of Kentucky, maybe basketball, football. You've seen 20 Final Fours that you've covered now, whether it be with or without Kentucky, beside the point. But so the question here is the names that you've seen come through the program. You've seen Petrino, you've seen Calipari, big names, all the one and dones, all the NBA stars. Is there a game or a moment or a feature you remember kind of doing out of the Kentucky program that really stands out to you and resonates like, I was in the building for that one, or that conversation went way differently than I thought. I learned something about that person that I didn't really know going into it, more so than sports perspective.
Well, I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, Kentucky basketball, the success they've had over the years. I mean, when you talk about games, covering games of Kentucky basketball, obviously the 1996 national championship when Rick Pitino won it, it had been Kentucky had won an NCAA title since 1978. When Rick came in, the program was on probation. He was a young coach, very passionate about basketball. He brought a different style of play. At that time, he was one of the first coaches to use the three-pointer, to encourage his players to shoot the three-pointer. They pressed up and down. That first team that Rick had, which went 14-14, was probably one of the most beloved Kentucky basketball teams, even though it went 14-14 and was on probation and couldn't play in the NCAA tournament. But he brought the fun and excitement back to Kentucky basketball, and the culmination of that was that title in '96. So that obviously was that was a great team. So that was fun to cover. The 2012 championship with John Calipari was obviously Anthony Davis. Even though we got to see him for 1 year, I mean, it was very obvious what kind of player he was and would become. And to be able to cover him for a year, that was great as well. I started out when in 1987. They put me on the UK football beat, and I covered UK football for 13 years. And even though UK didn't have a whole lot of success, there were still so many interesting people. I've always thought that football, because the roster is bigger, there's more opportunity really there for feature type stories to get to know people, to get to know the players better. I covered Hal Mummy when he came in football, and kind of with the air raid, which people didn't really know anything about. He came from Valdosta. Tim Couch was the quarterback at the time. He led them to the Outback Bowl. That was an exciting time to cover because it was new. It was something different, kind of like Pitino when Pitino came in with his three-pointers, the Pitino Bombinos, as they called them. So that was fun and exciting too, as well. I mean, I could go on and on about that, but there've been a lot of and feature stories, as you mentioned, on players and so forth. One of the things I started out in my career when I was doing the Colonel, the Kentucky Colonel, and then early in my career at the Herald Leader, I covered a lot of women's basketball, and they had some really good teams back then as well. Valerie Still, who was the all-time women's leading scorer at Kentucky, who was the sister of Art Still, who had played football at Kentucky. It was fun covering that group and doing feature stories on those players. So yeah, over the years, there have been a lot of those types of things.
Awesome. Well, John, I'll be honest with you. I could sit here for the next week or two and listen to you just go down that rabbit hole and keep going and going and going. I love the history and the sports and just learning where the game comes from and how it and where it goes, and listening to you tell your stories of covering the
I'm
deep
I'm
runs
old,
and
Vance. I
things.
got a lot of stories. I got a lot of stories because I'm old.
Yeah, well, listen, I could listen to them all. That it's called wisdom, or where we're from. So
Okay, I
we like to
like that. I
call,
might
yeah, we
have to
like to
use
call
that.
that wisdom around here.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so we'll as we wrap things up here, is there any advice, speaking of the age, you could give to students or someone like myself, young professionals, maybe not still a student, but who's either trying to break into this, get their foot in the door, or make a career change, maybe just whether it be sports casting, sports media, whatever that is. Any advice you've picked up along the way, you've been given, or just things you've noticed for the young people out there?
Well, obviously, my profession has changed greatly over the years. In my 40 years, it's a lot different job now than it was even 10, 20 years ago. I mean, from what all we do from, video and obviously online, the focus online and so forth. But the one thing I think that has stayed the same through the years to do this job, it's a different job. It's not a 9 to 5 job. Every day is different. Your hours are different. There are many late nights where you're covering games and you may not get home till 1 or 2 in the morning. From a road trip or something like that. You've got to love it. You've got to love the job. And I've been fortunate that I've loved every minute of it. The challenges that we've had over the past, several years in the journalism business and the newspaper business, they've been good for me because they've given me somebody who's been at the same place for so long. They're something different that I try to do and try to adapt to. So that's been good for me. But I think all along, and I tell when people ask me a question like you just asked me, I tell them you've got to love it. You've got to love the job and be passionate about the job. And I've been fortunate enough and very lucky in my job that I've done that. And I think if you love it enough and you're passionate enough, despite all the obstacles, you can make it work. You can have a successful career in this business. But the main thing is you have to love it and you have to be dedicated to it.
You have to keep showing up in November so you can be there in March over and over and over
Absolutely.
again.
Absolutely.
All right, John. Well, this has been incredible. I truly appreciate you sitting down with me and talking today. It's been great getting to hear some of your stories and chat about how you got to where you are and the journey you've taken throughout sports media and with the Lexington Herald Leader. So thank you again, and congratulations again on your, as we've said, much deserved award this year.
Well, thank you, Vance. I enjoyed talking to you, and thanks so much to the National Sports Media Association. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, John, you have a great day. Thanks again.